Welcome to Matt's Metalworking. In this video here I'll be going over how to make a custom switch panel. Here I'm making a custom switch panel for my boat. Aluminum will be used for this. I'm adding RGB lighting to my boat along with some other features such as an underwater transom light, a feature spot for a fan in the cuddy cabin, new dimmable lights in the cuddy cabin, a radio on and off switch, 12 volt cigarette lighter style port, and USB charging ports with a voltmeter. I purchased some aluminum flat bars 3/16 thick. The length and width will vary depending on what options you have along with where it's being mounted. I have already purchased what is required to be installed in this panel so I know the exact dimensions. Next is applying some tape for an easy layout. If a mistake is made, the tape can be removed and then reapplied. If you have the same size washers as your switches, this is a great way to get the visualization for the spacing and size requirements. Stainless steel push button style illuminated switches will be installed here, and you'll see that further on in the video. A tape measure, machinist square, and a fine tip marker are used to determine all the locations. For any drilled holes, the centers are marked out. Once done, here you can see a rough layout. I did make some minor changes a little further on. It was simply removing a feature and enlarging a hole for an extra switch. A center punch is used to mark out the centers for each of those holes. This will prevent the drill from wandering and will keep everything accurate. Moving over to the drill press, a center drill is used to start each of the holes. A center drill is rigid and does not have the flex that can potentially cause wander like a smaller drill bit. All my switches are in one side of the panel, while the 12 volt cigarette lighter style port and the USB charging ports are on the opposite side. Now is drilling the switch holes. I'm simply stepping up the size slowly as it'll leave a clean finish when the final hole is done. Again is another larger size, not the final size just yet. And finally is that final size required for the switch. There are two smaller holes for the dimmer switches, however this did change later on and I added another push button style switch instead. I used a step drill to clean any burrs around the edge of the holes. This works great with my OEM Tools 24485 20 volt lithium ion brushless 1/4 inch impact driver. Up to 3000 RPM, 300 foot-pounds of nut busting torque, and 260 pounds of tightening torque. This is a great addition to anyone's toolbox. A link to this impact driver will be included in the video description below. For cutting the larger holes, here I'm using a good quality hole saw. The required size for the USB chargers and 12 volt cigarette lighter ports. Plywood is applied under the panel so I'm not cutting into the drill press plate. Cutting oil is also applied to provide some lubrication and keep everything cool. A slow speed is also recommended on the drill press. Take your time and apply more oil as needed. Only light pressure is used here so the hole saw doesn't jam up. This isn't an overly powerful drill press, but it does get the job done. As you can see, the hole has been cut. The same process is used for the second hole, this time for another angle. Apply oil as needed and take your time with light pressure. This will take a few minutes. Then the second hole is done. Here's a view once both holes are in place. There are burrs which need to be removed. This can be easily done with a file. The panel is cut to size on the miter saw. Candle wax is applied to the saw blade to help with some lubrication. This is a carbide tip blade. Safety glasses are a must for this, and a vacuum cleaner hooked up is also a great idea as these shavings will go everywhere. Apply light pressure and cut the panel to size. Clamping the part in place is also a good idea as the piece may wander when you start up the saw. The panel was lightly filed and sanded to remove any burrs, then a quick assembly test is done. The two ports I purchased from Amazon, I'll include those links in the video description. Then the switches I had custom made with labels for their functions. The corner mounting holes are then laid out. Tape is used for the layout. then a tape measure and a fine tip marker to mark the locations. These are then center punched. They are center drilled on the drill press. Then the final holes are drilled based on what screws are being used to mount the panel. An interior panel was removed from the boat. This is where the switch panel will be mounted. The switch panel is squared up and a marker is used for its placement. The hole needs to be smaller than the switch panel so the mounting screws have something to fasten to. However, make sure there is enough room where it doesn't interfere with any components in the switch panel. First, a carpet is cut away using a razor knife. Then a saw is used to cut the plywood away. The switch panel was clamped into place and then the holes are drilled for the mounting points. After this has been removed, the carpet is vacuumed to remove any dust left over from cutting. The final holes are then drilled in the drill press. These can be countersunk depending on your fastener choice. The panel is screwed into place. Here I'm using stainless steel screws. On the back side you can see all the components and wiring. I labeled the wire connectors to make it a little more organized. Now for polishing the panel. I'm using wet-dry compatible sandpaper. Any other types of sandpaper will fall apart in the water. The sandpaper is pre-soaked and the panel was washed to remove any chance of contamination which may damage the surface. I would highly recommend a back-end pad to provide an even sanding surface. First was starting out with 800 grit sandpaper. This will remove a majority of the surface imperfections such as scratches, burrs, any coatings, etc. Work evenly across the surface, rinse the sandpaper and part as needed. A coarser grit can be used, such as 600 or even 400 if there is extensive surface damage. Next is moving on to 1000 grit sandpaper. Again, that sandpaper was pre-soaked. The part was rinsed before moving on to the next grit of sandpaper. The larger the number of grit, the finer the sanding marks will become. Now is 1500 grit, again using the same process. You'll see the surface finish change to finer marks. Moving on to 2000 grit, you can finish here before moving on to the polish, or go up to a higher grit which will give you a cleaner surface finish and make it easier for polishing. And finally is the optional grit of 3000. The part is always rinsed as needed and work evenly across the surface. Each stage after the initial 800 grit should only take a few minutes. The part can now be polished. For this I'm using an aluminum specific polish that is typically used on wheels. It's applied to a soft cloth and then worked into the surface. Make sure not to get any contaminants on this as it can scratch the surface. Gloves are highly recommended as this gets quite dirty. Once done, here's the final finish. No sealer is used to protect the final shine. The panel can now be assembled. All the switches and accessories are installed and tightened into place. As you can see, instead of having each cuddy cabin light on their own circuit, I made them on one circuit, only needing one dimmer switch. Now after the boat is all back together, here you can see how the switch panel looks when it's installed. There is no flex in the panel. It matches the boat nicely. Other surface options can include painting or even having a vinyl wrap applied. This concludes the rest of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment below and throw a like my way. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more metalworking videos. Thank you for watching.